Hello and welcome to this talk about Odoo expenses. I'm Damien, I'm a product owner at Odoo for several months now, and before that I was a developer in-house as well for approximately 7 years. Today I'd like to talk to you about expense management. It's a key area to improve business efficiency in your company or organization, and it's also a key area that can cause a lot of frustration if you mess it up. Indeed, problems with expense management can lead to loss of money, loss of time, loss of energy, and most importantly, frustrations for your employees or even managers. At Odoo, when I arrived, we were 120 employees in Belgium, and today, 8 years later, we are more or less 1,000, 1,100 maybe, so that's nearly a 10 times increase. And I dare say that expense management is as simple today as it was 8 years ago, even though we are 10 times more. The fact that we've added features over the years, such as the integration with next activities or integrations with email gateways or the mobile app, make it way easier for both employees and managers to work with expenses. And with Odoo 16, we keep going into that direction. Today I will demo you a few new features of Odoo Expense along with generic improvements to the interface and experience. These features are the fact that Odoo Expense now works with all taxes. In the past, you had to use taxes configured in a specific way. This is no longer the case. Now we've also added a new assistant to split expenses. For example, if you have an expense that need to be split around different taxation rates, such as alcoholic beverages versus meals in a restaurant receipt. And finally, I will also show you several smaller improvements that we've made to the experience and the interface along the way. So enough talking, let's dive in. I have a database here that was configured with some very basic data about my employees. Oop, I've lost my, there it is. And I will now set it up as if it was the first time I used it, which means that I have to create expense categories. In the past, this used to be called expense products, but it caused quite some confusion for employees when inputting their expenses. So it has now been renamed to categories. And another change that we introduced with Odoo 16 is that we now provide several categories out of the box that make sense for most businesses, such as communication expenses, meals, gifts to customers or employees, and things like that. In this case, I do not want to work with those, and if you do not want them, you can simply archive them and create your own, which is what I will do here. We first create a business lunch category. Oops, business lunch. That will not have a set cost because obviously the cost will vary for each expense. But I still want to re-invoice it to my customer. And now when I select my re-invoicing policy, Odoo will explain to me what will happen with my expense. In this case, if I select the at cost re-invoice policy, it means my expenses will be added to the sales order at their actual cost, meaning the amount that the employee entered into the system. If I do it at sales price, it will be added to the sales order at the sales price, including interactions with price lists, for example. And if I do not allow reinvoicing of these expenses, well, the option will simply not be available when using that product. So let's leave it to add costs. I'm going to remove the customer taxes here and the vendor taxes. That means the tax that are applied from the point of view of the buying of this expense now are not longer filtered. Indeed, in the past for Odoo 15, you had to use taxes that were configured to be included in the price. This is no longer the case. You can select any tax that you want from your accounting system, but the expense application will still use them as if they were included in the price. That means that you don't have to duplicate your taxes now to use them in Odoo Expense, which was something that happened a lot if you were working in business-to-business model, where most of your taxes were not price included. And finally, I can add an internal note that will be shown to my employees when they select this category. For example, my business lunch expense category should not be used for team lunches. And since I want to attract their attention, I can format this text and save it. I will create quickly another category that is just for my demonstration, and that cannot be reinvoiced. And finally, I will create one cost-based category. By cost-based, I mean that instead of entering a fixed amount when entering the expense, you have to enter a quantity. This is typically the case for mileage expenses, for example, because I need to pay my employees 37 cents per kilometer. This is usually something that is designed by the legal system or the work conditions of your base country. But I want to reinvoice this amount to my customer with a margin, with a profit. And so I can select the sales price reinvoicing and specify that I want, for example, 80 cents per kilometer. And this will be done automatically when I confirm the expenses. I don't need taxes here for this configuration. Finally, one of the new settings that you can set up in the settings of your expense application is a default journal. In the past, every expense report had to choose or to have its own expense journal set, and the system will select that one for you, which made the most sense according to its rules. The problem, of course, was that you don't always want the system to decide for yourself. Sometimes you want to have a sensible default because you have created your own expense journal, for example, in your accounting for specific reasons. These are what you decide, and you can now set those in the settings. If you do that and save, then now any expense report created by employees will target this journal by default. So I'm finished with my basic configuration. I'm going to log out and now log in as my employee, Mark. I can create expenses the same ways I used to before. For example, I can use the mobile application to scan receipts with the camera. I can send emails to the email gateway, which will be automatically assigned their category based on the subject line of the email. I can create manually, and now with Odoo 16, I can also create massively or create en masse several expenses at once by using drag and drop of PDF files. So here I have 2 expenses that I want to use. I can simply drag and drop them here. And if you use digitalization, it's really useful because it means that your employees just have to drop these values there, and the expense date and the amounts will be filled automatically. That way they just have to fill in some details or some justification if they still need to. Here I'm going to do this manually. So for example, here I have a business lunch that is for 60 euros, and I do not want to reinvoice my customers for that at the moment. And if you look at the total of this expense, you will see that my 60 euros are not taxed homogeneously. Indeed, I have some part taxed at 21% and some part taxed at 12%. Before Odoo 16, what you had to do for these cases is simply input the expense twice in the system. That means duplicating everything, which can be a loss of time and energy for something that is rather simple. So we now added splitting assistant that allows you to split your expenses according to different taxes. By default, the system will suggest that you split in 2 because that's what happens most of the time. You can, of course, split it in more than 2 places. My total for the 21% taxation is 1380, sorry. So that's okay, correct, with 240 in VAT tax. We can see that the system is not happy because at the moment my total does not sum up to the original total of my expense. And the second line will be 4620 and is taxed at 12%, which is 495. This is correct. My amounts do match. I can finish my split. Everything has been duplicated on the new splitted expenses. So the date, the customer to reinvoice, the eventual, the possible comments that you put as a justifications, everything got duplicated. I have one other expense to categorized as a gift because this one is a gift, and I can input my amount manually here. And finally, I would like to create a new expense for a mileage, for a journey to my customer. This means that I do not have now to enter a price, but to enter a quantity of items, which will be reimbursed at a fixed cost. And as in any numerical field in Odoo, I can use simple formulas to get my amount. I know that the journey is 26 kilometers. I've been there 2 days this week, so that's 4 journeys. So I can simply do 4 times 26. and I want to re-invoice my customer for these journeys. I've entered all the data I needed to enter. Now I would like to submit this for approval by my manager. I can do it in several ways. Of course, I can do it item by item. For example, from this expense, I can create a report and leave that report to only contain one item, maybe because the discussion should be different there or whatever internal reason you have. So I can save and submit. And now to submit the rest, I can either just click on this button, which will take all the draft expenses and suggest me to put them in a report. I can select only the expenses I want to include in the report, and it will do that as well. In this case, I want to use everything, so let's go with that. Everything is normally correct. Indeed, I just want to add some information here. So Christmas gift, for example. So that my manager knows what this is about, and I can submit. I've done my part as an employee. Now let's go back to my manager. The first thing you will notice is that we've simplified the menus of the expense application quite significantly for managers. In the past, you used to have a menu for expenses that had to be validated, expenses that had to be posted or reimbursed, which meant that you had to do a lot of back and forth to find the data you wanted to find. Now, if I look for the expense menu, or the expense reports, in fact, I have only one menu leading me there, which is this one. And I can do everything from here. I can filter data in a gist by just filtering the states I want to see, or by employee, or also by selecting the category I want to manage. So for example, all the expense reports that contain at least one gift expense should be included in this filter. Let's go with the first report my employee submitted. I have, of course, an activity waiting for me here since he asked for my approval. That is reflected in this panel as well. And something that we changed and that is incredibly useful for manager in Odoo 16 is that now all the attachments, the documents that you provided as an employee to justify the expense are centralized on the expense report. So here I see that I have my business lunch that got split in two, as well as my Christmas gift. And in the attachments, I have the possibility to check all the justifications. Of course, I can still drill down by expense and check that everything is correct expense by expense, but I can also mostly do everything from this single place. Once I'm satisfied that everything is correct and that all the justification documents are included, I can approve the request. And if everything is correct, post the journal entries into my accounting journals. Once that is done, the rest of the flow is as it was before in Odoo 15, is that I can simply proceed with the payment to the employee through the accounting wizard, or I can use the payslip integration if I have Odoo payroll installed. So I have validated this report. We can see that the activity has been marked as done, so there is nothing more for me to do here. And we can do the same for this mileage expense that I will approve and post. And now something that was not there before is the integration with the sales orders. So as my expense was made to be reinvoiced to a customer through a quotation or sales order, I have now a direct shortcut here to access this item from my report. If I do that, I can see that my mileage expense has been reflected on the sales order quite normally with the quantity of kilometers, the unit price that I set on my category, and this is actually new with Odoo 16. We now reflect the costs of the expense on the cost of the line in the sales order. This means that your margin analysis is correct, and in the past, expenses tended to mess up your margins. This is no longer the case, and everything is computed as you expect it to be. Finally, we've also simplified a little bit the reporting screens of this expense application. In the past, you used to have a lot of extraneous fields or confusing data that was included here. This is no longer what happens. And now we've also some generic changes to the Odoo graphs that, yeah, of course, here I don't have a lot of data to show you, but that can allow you to display cumulative graphs. For example, if you want to see the amount of expenses that was expensed by a single project or by a single employee over time, well, you can now see that with these cumulative graphs. That's mostly it for Odoo 16. There are still smaller changes here and there in the screens. We've tried to clarify the screens a little bit, but I won't go into details about this. If we recap, what are the new features that we've seen today? First, we have seen that Odoo Expense now work with all taxes. We've also seen that we have a new expense splitting assistant to allow you to apply different taxes to different parts of an expense. And we have the possibility to set up a default journal in the expense settings. As far as the experience and the interface are concerned, we've reduced the amount of menus for managers. We've also simplified the screen and make it possible to do everything from one place for managers. Including the fact that the justification documents are now all centralized on the report itself. For employees, we've made it easier to submit expenses by using, for example, drag and drop in combination with the OCR. This is a really good solution to win some time there. Thank you very much for taking this tour of the expense changes that we've done with Odoo 16. I hope to see you soon, and I wish you a good day. Bye-bye.
Let me read the first one. How can you send expenses to vendor bills? Is it possible to do it?
At the moment, I know that it's something that is quite requested. Basically, we have a way to select journals that is rather a shortcut in your accounting than some of what most users may be used to. We are not yet at the point where we want to have three-way reconciliation or going through a different journal. But in the case of a company paid by employees, you can in fact select any purchase journal that you want in the default configuration, so that should work out of the box.
Nice. Is the OCR able to manage multi-tax expenses?
No, it is not. At the moment, we only detect, I think, the amount. We try to parse a little bit the description as well, but it doesn't do any complex splitting like it does in vendor bills, for example. It's a little bit simpler in expenses.
Yes. Can expenses be paid in batch for the bank directly? Well, no. Can expenses be paid in batches to the bank directly from Odoo and be matched easily in bank reconciliation?
Well, I'm not the accounting expert, but normally you should be able to, in fact, export your payments as, I don't remember the file format exactly that you can submit to your bank. But yes, I don't think that's a problem. In fact, I think it works already in Odoo 15, if I'm not mistaken.
Is it possible to link an expense to a sales order at manager validation step?
At manager validation step. The manager has access to all the data of the expense. So if the manager is the one that needs to link the expense, it's, I think I have it in the screen here, if I can show you. If I go to the expense report, of course this one has already been approved. That's not the right one. This one has already been approved. So I cannot change everything anymore, but as the manager, I have access, of course, in the list view to all the optional fields, including the customer to re-invoice. And if it's a draft expense, but actually, I think I can, there you go. Actually, I think I can cancel it, and if now I can edit it. So indeed, the manager can very easily change the SO that they want to re-invoice, or even set it up for the first time from there.
Nice. Those expenses, can they become officially invoices? Because sometimes we have like the tickets, but when we have an official invoice, can it become an invoice then?
No, in fact, let's call it the plumbing behind it is still the same accounting, so it's an account move with the account move lines that you're basically used to in invoices, but it's not considered an invoice. I think if you need to do that, you might probably even want to use vendor bills instead of expenses. I'm assuming that the question is about expenses paid by the company, most probably, otherwise it's probably not going to land there, but yeah, I would use vendor bills in that cases. Yeah.
Okay, good. Can you have expenses in different currencies?
Yes, you have support for multi-currency. I didn't show it, but when you, as an employee, when you set up, when you input your expense, if multi-currency is enabled, you can select the currency that you want. The rate is obviously converted at the rate of the expense date. So if it was in the past, it's converted with the rate of, let's say, last month. But yeah, it works quite well.
Okay. Interesting one. Can an employee submit expenses if he is not a user in the database?
No. Perhaps. So there is a possibility since Odoo, I think 13 or maybe 14, to send expenses through email gateways. They land directly in the expense system. My own understanding, because I didn't go in depth preparing for that question, is that normally you need to be an internal user for that to work, but I am not 100% sure, so there may be a possibility there. But otherwise, no. The point is that it should be for employees that are, in fact, in your HR system, possibly used by the timesheet as well. So everything is indeed linked to a user. However, okay, I can now, let's say, rewrite the questions. Do you need all your expenses to be linked to a user? The answer is no. So, for example, if you have all your employees configured in the HR system, you can register all the expenses as the admin for other employees, not users, employees. That will work just fine. So you don't need all your employees to be users, but if you want them to be able to do it, then yes, they will need to be users.
Nice, very good. Is this all available on the mobile phone as well?
Yes, everything that I've shown is available on mobile. Obviously not the drag and drop, because maybe on Apple devices. I don't know. I know that there is some magic going on there, but yeah, everything works on mobile. As I said, you have even a little bit of an extra feature in the sense that you have a scan button that allows you to scan the receipts directly with your camera. So you just take a picture and it creates an expense. And if you have the OCR enabled, everything goes on as I showed today. So yeah, everything is on mobile.
Can I add the expenses in cryptocurrency?
That's the kind of question we get every year, even though I would thought that they would calm down these days. No, Odoo is not really playing well with cryptocurrency. That's not something that we really want to dig into for the reasons that it's more of an asset than a real currency. So, yeah.
Okay. This is a bit more legal. What about the legal parts for France? Could we trash the originals?
No, you cannot. We have a lot. We receive this question a lot for France and for Spain as well, I think, because the system is more or less the same. You need to have a centralized, unalterable repository of expenses, of let's say proofs, so typically the PDF of the receipt, to be able to completely trash the original and not have to care about them. We are not up to that point yet. I don't know when and if we will do it, but at the moment, indeed, for expenses, you need to conserve the paper originals, at least in France and in Spain. For example, in Belgium, we don't have such let's say, restrictive laws with regard to expense justification. So in Belgium, it's quite fine, but of course, it depends on your country.
This one is linked to the first one that we had. So how can you send expenses to vendor bills?
I think that's the same question.
It's exactly the same. Okay, I wasn't sure. So thank you. Let me see. How can I pay to my employee if he had paid an official invoice already? Well,
if he had paid, for example, if there is a vendor bill but he has paid it,
yes.
Let's assume, you can of course include it as an expense. It will work quite fine. You will probably have to duplicate it because of course the accounting entries will be a little bit different here because you need to pay your employee and not your customer, your vendor. But that's not really a problem. Yeah.
Cool. Is it possible to add a markup for reimbursement? For example, to cover for eventual bank fees or currency exchange rates?
No, no, that's not something that we do. Obviously, if you have the access of a manager, you can do that yourself. So you can possibly reevaluate the amount by adding, as I said, you can use computation. So you could, in fact, input it manually and have a 4% margin. But it's not something that we do in standard, no.
I have, I think, a last one. So will the receipts from the expenses app be included in accounting?
Yes, they will. Actually, if you go to, I don't know if I have accounting here, I don't think so, but the receipts is joined to the account move, I believe. I'm fairly certain. But otherwise, you can, of course, link it manually. And if it's not the case, that's actually something that should happen. So if it's not the case, I'll check later on. And we'll probably do this for 16.1 or 17 for on-premise installations.
That's it for the questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Pauline. Thank you very much,
Damien.
everybody. Have a
Bye.
good afternoon and a good second day of Odoo experience.